He stood
What's
in
the
the
matter,
kitchen
old
for a
man?
long time,
You watch
holding
your
his coffee
mouth,
cup with
or
both
what,
hands,
Gramps? I'll
the way
show
he
you
always
what.
did when
Bring
his
it.
arthritis was
All right,
bad,
listen
looking
up. The
out
route's
window at
locked.
the
No
great
mistakes.
pink sky
Copy
over
that.
St.
Check your
Petersburg.
gear. We move at dawn.
The
That's
kind
right.
of sky that couldn't make up its
Tell me the
mind.
truth.
The kind
I don't know
of
what
morning
you
that
mean.
felt like
This
it was
picture,
waiting
who
for
is it?
something.
Please, stop.
His cane leaned against the counter. Martha's jacket, the old canvas one she'd bought him at a flea market in Sarasota 15 years ago, the one with the brass buttons she'd polished herself, hung by the door where it always hung. He put it on slowly, one arm at a time, the way you put on something that still held the shape of another person. He had $42 in his wallet, enough for groceries later, enough for a coffee at the little stand near the pier entrance, the one run by the older man who never asked questions and always gave him an extra sugar packet without being asked. He took his cane. He went to the pier. That decision, that small, ordinary decision made by a 73-year-old man on a Tuesday morning in Florida was the thing that started everything. Roy found his usual spot near the far end where the wooden boards were worn smooth and the railing had a slight lean that let him brace his elbow against it without thinking about it. He watched the pelicans. He watched a father try to help his young daughter cast a fishing line, the little girl laughing every time the line went sideways. He drank his coffee. He thought about Martha the way he thought about her every morning, not with the sharp grief that had lived in his chest for 8 years, but with the quiet, steady ache of someone who has learned to carry weight without putting it down. He didn't notice the young man watching him from the parking lot. He didn't notice the second young man near the bait shop phone, angled just slightly toward him. He didn't notice the third sitting on a bench 20 yards away, with earbuds in, not listening to music. Roy Callahan had survived 2 tours. He had buried friends in the kind of soil that doesn't give them back. He had held his wife's hand through 4 rounds of chemotherapy, and then, through the night, she stopped breathing. He was not a man who scared easily. But he was 73 years old, and he walked with a cane, and he was alone on a pier on a Tuesday morning, and Tanner Voss had been watching him for 3 days. Tanner was 24. He had 48,000 subscribers. He posted every 3 days like clockwork, not because he was disciplined, but because he had learned through careful study of his own analytics that 48 hours was exactly how long his audience's attention span lasted before they needed something new to feed on. He understood his viewers the way a fisherman understands weather. He knew what they wanted before they knew themselves. What they wanted was reaction, raw, unfiltered human reaction, the kind that couldn't be faked and couldn't be staged and had to be extracted from someone who didn't know they were being used. Joy didn't work. Joy was boring. Confusion was okay. Embarrassment was better. But what really drove the numbers, at what sent the comments flooding in and the shares multiplying and the algorithm pushing his videos to the top of every feed, was distress. Real distress. The look on a person's face when the world turned on them in a moment they didn't expect. Tanner had a formula. He had been running it for 3 years, refining it video by video until it was nearly perfect. He chose his targets carefully. Always alone. Always older or visibly struggling or carrying something heavy, not literally but in the way their body held itself, in the way their eyes moved, in the way they occupied space, like they were trying to take up as little of it as possible. People who had learned to make themselves small. People the world had already taught to expect less. He had done this 11 times before Roy. Each time he had walked away with content. Each time the comments had been worth it, half outrage, half laughter. And the algorithm didn't care which half was which, because engagement was engagement and engagement was money. He had a system. He had a crew. He had a camera angle for everything. What Tanner Voss did not have was any idea whose father Roy Callahan was. He came off the parking lot at 9:47 in the morning with his phone already recording the live stream, running the little red dot blinking in the corner of the screen. His 2 crew members were in position on the pier. The third Briggs was already uploading early footage to a backup drive from the parking lot. Everything was in place. The operation was as rehearsed as anything Tanner had ever done. He came up on Roy's left side, the side without the cane, moving casual and easy, like a man who had nowhere to be and nothing to prove. "Hey, old timer," Tanner said. His voice had that particular tone he had perfected, friendly on the surface with something sharp underneath, like a handshake that squeezed too hard. "You got a minute?" Roy looked up. His eyes were clear and steady, the pale blue of a sky after rain. I suppose, he said. Cool, cool. Tanner moved closer. Too close. Inside the distance, a stranger should stand. Just you mind if I ask you something for a video? Depends on the question. Tanner smiled. The smile that his viewers knew. The one that meant the setup was already done, and now came the part where the person didn't know they were already caught. I just want to know about your wallet, man. What you got in there, for the content. Roy's hand moved slightly toward his jacket pocket. The instinct of a man who had learned to be careful, and that small movement was all Tanner needed. He moved fast. The punch came to Roy's stomach, not hard enough to put him down, but hard enough to double him over. Hard enough to take the breath out of him and fold him at the middle and send his cane clattering across the pier's wooden boards. Roy's hands shot out for the railing. His knees buckled. The world tilted. "Where's the wallet, old man?" Tanner said, his voice dropping, the friendly tone gone entirely. "Don't make this harder. Please, Roy's voice came out cracked. His hand pressed against his jacket, against the pocket where Martha's photograph lived. "Please, I don't have anything." "Liar!" Tanner grabbed the front of Roy's jacket and yanked, spinning the old man, hand-digging into his pocket, fingers closing around the small collection of bills. Roy fought to hold on, fought the way a man fights when what he's holding isn't money but something that can't be replaced, but his hands were shaking and his knees hadn't steadied, and Tanner was 24 years old and had done this before. Around them, the pier kept moving. A family with a stroller veered slightly wider. A couple looked away. Someone's phone was up from 30 feet back recording, but no one moved. No one said anything. No one stepped in. This was what Tanner counted on. This was the ugly arithmetic at the center of his whole operation, that people in public spaces would rather pretend they didn't see than be the one who stepped in. That discomfort was contagious. That the presence of other people who were doing nothing made doing nothing feel like the obvious choice. He had never been wrong about this. Not once in 11 videos had a stranger stepped in. Then the sound hit. It didn't build. It arrived, a wall of engine noise that rolled across the parking lot and up the pier and vibrated in the wooden boards under Roy's feet and in the railing he was gripping and in the fillings in his back teeth. Not one engine, not two, 15. 15 engines in tight formation, dropping in volume simultaneously as they cut into the lot, the sound shifting from roar to rumble. Chrome catching the morning light in quick silver flashes, the patches visible from 50 yards in the clear Florida air. Hell's Angels, Tampa chapter. Tanner's grip loosened. Just for a second. Just enough. The lead bike didn't slow down gently. It came in hard and cut at a sharp angle, the rear tire barking against the asphalt, and stopped 10 feet from the pier entrance with the kind of precision that made it look like the rider had done this 1,000 times in exactly this way. The rider was off before the engine finished dying. Helmet pulled free in one motion. Boots on pavement, not loud but solid. The kind of footstep that registers somewhere below conscious thought, in the part of the brain that is older than language and knows when something important is happening before the rest of the mind catches up. Reese Callahan was 38 years old. She stood 5'9" in her riding boots and wore the road the way some people wear old scars, not something she talked about, but something that was part of the shape of her. Her hair was dark, cut close on the sides, longer on top, still slightly damp from the morning. The Tampa chapter president's patch was on her left chest. She had earned it in ways she didn't explain to people who asked. She crossed the distance between her bike and where Tanner stood in 4 strides. She didn't raise her voice. "Let go of him," she said. Tanner turned. He saw the patch. He saw the 14 bikes still idling in the lot, the rider sitting watching, not moving but not needing to. He saw the woman in front of him who was looking at him the way you look at something you have already decided how to handle. He let go of Roy's jacket. Reese stepped past Tanner without touching him and put her hand on her father's arm, steadying him, feeling the tremor still running through him, the shallow way he was breathing. She picked up his cane from the boards without looking down, placed it in his hand. Then she turned back to Tanner. "That's my father," she said. Her voice was flat and even and completely without heat, which was somehow worse than anger. "And your stream is still live." Tanner looked at his phone on the pier boards, where it had fallen, still recording the live counter, still climbing. He looked at the comments flooding in. He looked at the woman in front of him who was watching him with the expression of someone who had already decided this was over. His mouth opened, closed. He picked up his phone. He backed away. He turned and walked through the crowd that had gathered past the families who were now watching openly, past the tourists who had been recording from a safe distance, past all the people who had done nothing and were now watching someone else do something. He walked to his car with his hands not quite steady. He drove away. Reese watched until his taillights disappeared from the lot exit. Then she turned back to her father. Roy was standing now, both hands on his cane, breathing more evenly. His jacket had been pulled half off one shoulder in the struggle. A button hung by a thread. His eyes were wet, but when he spoke, his voice came out steady, the voice of a man who had trained himself over decades to hold his shape under pressure. "You didn't have to do that," Roy said. Reese looked at him for a moment. Something moved across her face there and gone fast as a cloud shadow. "Yeah, I did." Dex Merritt came off his bike and walked over with a bottle of water, holding it out to Roy with a nod. Max Stroud was already on the phone, voice low. Stone leaned against his bike and watched the parking lot exit with his arms crossed. Roy took the water. He looked at his daughter, at the patch on her vest, at the riders who had come without being asked, and stood without being told, and said nothing because nothing needed to be said. "Thank you," he said quietly. Reese nodded. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were already moving, scanning the parking lot, reading the geometry of what had just happened, calculating. Because she had seen Tanner's face when he backed away, and she knew that look. She had seen it before. It wasn't the look of someone who had learned a lesson. It was the look of someone already building a new plan. There was something else. Something she had not mentioned to the others, not yet. When Dex's phone had buzzed 40 minutes earlier with the anonymous tip, "Old man on the pier being watched since morning," Reese had looked at the number and known immediately it was a burner. No trace. No name. Someone who knew Roy would be there. Someone who knew what Tanner was going to do. Someone who wanted her to be there in time. She didn't know who. She filed it away the way she filed away everything that didn't have an explanation yet, carefully in a place she could find it again. But right now her father was shaking and she had her hand on his arm, and that was what mattered. They loaded Roy into the passenger seat of Mac's truck. Dex rode alongside. Mom. The chapter moved out together the way they moved everywhere, as a unit, as something that had weight, as something the road itself seemed to make room for. Reese rode last. She let the others get ahead by 100 yards, and then she rode alone for a while, the bridge over Tampa Bay opening up in front of her, the water flat and silver and wide, and she let herself feel for just those 100 yards what she would not let herself feel in front of anyone else. Her father had been on the ground. Her father who had come back from 2 wars intact. Her father who had held her mother's hand through every terrible thing and never once flinched. Her father who had refused to come live with her after Martha died because he didn't want to be a burden, who had said it so quietly and so firmly that Reese had let it go when she should have argued, who had been living alone in that house for 8 years while she told herself he was fine, he was tough, he was Roy Callahan, and Roy Callahan didn't need anyone. Her father had been on the ground on a public pier in broad daylight, and nobody had moved. She crossed the bridge. She let the feeling go. She pulled it back down to where it lived and put the lid on it and turned it into something else, something cold and clear and useful. That night, the garage behind Max Stroud's house became something different than a garage. 2 folding tables set up in the center, 3 laptops open. Dex had the big monitor running, his fingers moving through Tanner Voss's social media presence with the focused speed of someone who had done this kind of digging before. 48,000 subscribers, Dex said, posts every 3 days, has been for about 2.5 years. He pulled up the video library. 12 videos with the same pattern, different faces, same structure. Older adults, homeless individuals, single mothers. Always alone, always in public spaces, always ending with the target breaking down while Tanner watched with that same expression, that calculated satisfaction that looked like entertainment but was something colder underneath. The chapter sat around the tables in silence and watched. Reese stood at the end of the second table with her arms crossed and her coffee going cold beside her. She watched a video of Tanner following an elderly woman through a grocery store, mocking her, not letting her leave, filming her cry. She watched a video of him cornering a veteran outside a VA clinic and pushing until the man had a panic attack on camera, and then titling the video something designed to make viewers laugh at the man's pain. She closed that video before it finished. "How does he keep doing this?" Max said, not angry, genuinely trying to understand the mechanism. "Because nobody stops him," Dex said. "He films in public, claims free speech. The people he targets don't have the money to sue. They don't have the platform to fight back. They just become content and then they disappear." He scrolled further back. "There's more. 3 years ago, arrested for petty theft. Charges dropped when the victim didn't show up to court. Harassment complaint from a store owner settled quietly. Assault accusation from 6 months ago, the victim recanted." He looked up. "Recanted or got paid off. Take your pick." Reese didn't say anything for a long moment. Stone was the one who finally spoke. "He's been doing this for 3 years and nobody's managed to stop him." "He's smart," Reese said. Her voice was neutral, flat, carrying none of the thing that was moving underneath it. "He understands exactly what he can get away with. He picks people who can't fight back in places where the law gives him cover, and he knows how to make himself the victim when anyone pushes back." She looked at the screen. "We're not going to solve this tonight. We need more. I need to know every person he's done this to, every victim, every complaint, every place he's been." She looked at Dex. "Find them." Dex nodded and turned back to the monitor. Reese picked up her phone, stood and walked to the far corner of the garage. She dialed her father. Roy picked up on the second ring. "I'm fine," he said before she could speak. "I know you are." A pause. "You shouldn't have left the meeting for me." "Dad, I mean it. You had chapter business." "Dad," her voice didn't change, "something that happens in that room is more important than what happened on that pier today." "Nothing." A longer pause. She could hear him breathing. She could hear the television in the background. Roy always had the television on low. Not for the sound, just for the presence of other voices in the house. "I want you to check your locks tonight," Reese said. "Love them, and call me if anything feels off. Anything at all." "I've been locking my own doors for 50 years, Roy said. "I know that." She leaned her shoulder against the garage wall. "Humor me." Another pause, then quieter. "He took the bills from my wallet. $42. "I know. He didn't get Martha's picture." Reese closed her eyes. "I know, Dad." That's the part that mattered. She stayed on the phone until she heard him say goodnight. She stayed a few seconds after that, listening to the silence on the line before she ended the call and stood in the corner of the garage with her phone in her hand and the cold moving in off the bay through the half-open door. Then she went back to the tables. At 2:14 in the morning, Dex pushed back from the monitor and rubbed his eyes. 17, he said. 17 people he's targeted that I can verify. Some of them have their own comments on his videos. Some of them filed complaints. Some of them just disappeared from public record after the incident. I've got names, dates, approximate locations. He looked at the printed list. Some of them might talk. Some of them are probably still scared. Reese looked at the list. 17 names, 17 people Tanner Voss had turned into content. "Start making calls in the morning," she said, and gentle, "give them time, don't push." The chapter broke up just before 3. Reese drove home through empty streets, the city quiet, the traffic lights cycling through their colors for no one. She parked in the driveway and sat in the truck for a few minutes, not moving, thinking about her father on the pier and the $42 in Martha's photograph, and the way Roy's voice had sounded when he said, "That's the part that mattered." She went inside. She sat at the kitchen table. She opened her laptop and pulled up Tanner's channel and watched with the city quiet around her until she had seen every video he had ever made. It was almost 5 in the morning when she closed the laptop. She had 3 hours before the world started again. She didn't sleep. At 6:02 in the morning, her phone buzzed with a notification, a news alert. She looked at the screen. Tanner Voss had posted a new video. He was sitting in what looked like a hospital room, white curtains behind him, a bruised eye, a split lip. She couldn't tell yet if the injuries were real or manufactured, couldn't tell if he had walked into an ER and said he'd been jumped, or if he had applied theatrical makeup with the same deliberate care he applied to every other element of his content. His hands shook slightly as he held the phone. His voice was soft and trembling in a way that she recognized from years of watching people perform emotions they didn't feel as a very skilled performance. I was assaulted yesterday, he said. He touched his face gently, theatrically. By a gang, a female gang leader and her crew. They came at me because I was just talking to an older gentleman on the pier. I didn't do anything. I was just doing my content. He paused. Let the silence breathe the way you let silence breathe when you want an audience to feel something. I'm scared, he said. I don't know what to do. She watched the comments load. Thousands of them. This is insane. Press charges. Gang violence is out of control. You need a lawyer. We've got you. Stay safe. Reese set her phone face down on the table. She understood now, fully completely, what she was dealing with. This was not just a man who hurt people for content. This was a man who understood narrative, who understood that the first story told is the story that sticks, who had stayed up through the night, same as she had, crafting a version of yesterday that made him the victim and her the aggressor, that took advantage of every assumption his audience carried about women in motorcycle clubs, that weaponized his own gender, his own youth, his own apparent fragility in a hospital bed against everything she actually was. He had posted before she had had a chance to wake up. He had thought about this. He had planned for this. He had prepared his countermove before he'd even gotten home. Reese picked her phone back up. She looked at the video one more time, at his face, at the careful performance of fear, at the hospital room backdrop that may or may not have been real, and she let herself see it for what it was. Not an obstacle, not a setback, a mistake, because he had put himself on record. He had told a story, and a story that wasn't true was a story that could be unmade. She called Dex. He picked up on the first ring. I've seen it. Get everyone together, Reese said. We're going to the station. You sure that's the move? He wants to make me the villain. The only way to fight that is to stand in the light. She stood, moved to the window, looked at the morning coming up over the rooftops. Get me every angle of footage from yesterday, every witness, every frame. Already pulling it, Dex said. And Dex, she paused, the anonymous tip from yesterday? The burner number. Run it through everything you have. I want to know who was watching that pier. A beat. You think someone knew what was going to happen? I think someone sent us there at exactly the right time, Reese said, and I want to know why. By noon, the video had 200,000 views. By the time Reese walked into the Tampa Police Department with Dex behind her and a folder of documented evidence under her arm, local news was running it on the afternoon cycle. Social media influencer claims assault by motorcycle gang. They showed the edited clip, the part that started with Reese grabbing Tanner's shirt and ended with him backing away, looking frightened. They didn't show the part before it. They didn't show Roy on the boards. They didn't show Tanner's hand in her father's pocket. Detective Renee Calloway met them in the hall outside the interview room. She was 45, sharp-eyed, with the steadiness of someone who had spent years watching people lie to her face and had learned to let them finish before she responded. She looked at the folder under Reese's arm. I was going to call you, Calloway said. I know, Reese said. Let's save time. Inside the room, Reese laid out everything. 23 angles of footage from 23 different witnesses on the pier. Timestamps, sequence. The full unedited version from the moment Tanner began his approach to the moment he walked back to his car. She set the folder of background documentation beside the footage, Tanner's prior arrests, the harassment complaints, the assault accusation. Calloway watched the footage without speaking. Her partner, Detective Warren Slade, leaned against the wall behind her with his arms crossed. When the footage ended, the room was quiet for a moment. Why didn't he show this part? Calloway said. It wasn't quite a question if they based on them. Because he's a liar, Reese said, and he's very good at it. Calloway leaned back. She looked at Reese for a moment with the evaluating steadiness that was her professional default. I want to be straight with you. He's got public sympathy right now. The narrative is already moving. Even with this footage, this is going to take time. I understand how it works. And in the meantime, he's free to keep... I understand, Reese said again. Her voice didn't rise. But understand something too. My father was attacked. I protected him. If Tanner Voss comes near him again, I'll do the same thing. She looked at Calloway steadily. That's not a threat. It's a statement of fact. Calloway held her gaze. After a moment, she nodded. We'll be in touch. Reese and Dex walked out of the precinct into the Tampa afternoon. The sun was warm and direct, the kind of Florida sunshine that felt like a statement. For a moment, just a moment, something eased in Reese's chest. The police had the evidence. Calloway was sharp. The truth was documented and time-stamped and irrefutable. Then her phone buzzed. Dex's buzzed at the same time. She looked at her screen. A new notification. Tanner Voss had posted again, standing outside the police department, phone up, smile wide. Just gave my statement. The detectives were amazing. They're building a case. Justice is coming. He had been here while they were inside. He had been waiting in the parking lot, had watched them walk in, had filmed himself outside the same building at the same time, and had crafted a story so different from reality that anyone watching would have no idea that the truth was sitting 20 yards away in a folder on a detective's desk. Reese looked at the screen for a long moment. Then she looked up at the city around her, at the buildings, the streets, the ordinary machinery of a normal day, and she understood with a cold and crystalline clarity that the fight she was actually in had almost nothing to do with fists. She put her phone in her pocket. "Let's go check on Roy," she said. They rode back through the city in the late afternoon light, the two bikes running in easy parallel, the Tampa Bay glittering off to the west, the palm trees standing still in the heat. Reese kept her eyes on the road, kept her hands steady on the bars, kept her breathing even. Her father was 73 years old. He had $42 in his wallet on a Tuesday morning and Martha's photograph in his jacket pocket, and the way his voice had sounded on the phone the night before, that's the part that mattered, was something she would carry in her chest for a long time. Tanner Voss thought he had picked an old man on a pier, a soft target, someone who would fold, someone who would disappear into his content and never fight back the way the others had. He thought he understood the arithmetic of vulnerability. He thought he knew exactly what he was dealing with. He had looked at Roy Callahan and seen a man alone. He had not looked far enough to see the daughter. Roy stopped going to the pier on day 3. It started smaller than that. The morning after the police station, he skipped his usual walk around the block. Just once, he told himself, just because his ribs were still tender and the weather was coming in off the Gulf with that low pressure that made his knees talk. The day after that, he didn't open the front curtains. He told himself it was the glare. He had always hated the morning glare off the neighbor's car. But Reese had been reading her father since she was 7 years old, and she knew the difference between a man resting and a man retreating. She came by on the afternoon of day 3 and found him sitting in the kitchen in the half-dark, the curtains drawn, the television on low in the next room, an untouched mug in front of him. He had the photograph of Martha out, which he only did when something had gotten past all his defenses, and he needed to talk to someone who already knew everything. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down without being invited, the way you sit with someone who has stopped asking for company. "You're not eating," she said. "I ate." "What did you eat?" A pause. "Toast." "That's not eating, Dad." Roy looked at the photograph. He had a way of going quiet that was different from other people's silence. It had texture to it, weight, like the quiet of a house after something loud has happened. "I heard his car last night," he said finally. Reese went still. "What time?" "Around 2, maybe 2:30. Roy's hands were folded around the cold mug. He slowed down in front of the house. I could hear the engine drop, idling out there for maybe 30 seconds, then pulling away. He looked up at her. "He wanted me to hear it. That's the point of it, isn't it? He doesn't have to do anything. He just has to let me know he can." Reese looked at her father's face. In the dim kitchen light, with his hands wrapped around the cold cup and Martha's photograph on the table, and the television murmuring to itself in the next room, Roy Callahan looked like a man who had survived a great many things and was wondering for the first time if surviving was the same as being safe. She wanted to tell him it was going to be all right. She wanted to say it the way she had said it when she was a child, and he was the one in the doorway, and she was the one who needed the reassurance. She wanted to offer him that simplicity. She didn't, because he would have known it wasn't true, and Roy Callahan had never responded well to being managed. "I want you to come stay with me," she said instead. "No, Dad, I've lived in this house for 31 years. His voice was quiet, but it had iron in it. "Martha and I bought it together. I painted every room in it. I put those shelves up in the kitchen, which took me 4 tries because I was never as handy as she thought I was." A small pause that might have been almost a smile. "I'm not leaving my house because some 24-year-old with a phone decided I was content." Reese looked at him. She thought about the car idling in the dark at 2 in the morning. She thought about Tanner's video about the 200,000 views about the way the comments had moved and multiplied and built a version of events that had no relationship to what had actually happened on that pier. Okay, she said, but call me. Any hour, anything that doesn't feel right. I know the number, Roy said. He reached across the table and touched her hand once brief firm and then pulled back. Go do what you need to do. What Reese needed to do was building in the background of everything else taking shape in the gaps between other things accumulating the way storms accumulate over the Gulf quietly steadily until they aren't quiet anymore. Dex had been working the phones. Of the 17 names on his list, 11 had responded and were willing to speak or remained reachable. 3 had not returned calls at all. 2 had returned calls only to say they weren't interested, that they had moved on, that they didn't want to be involved. And of the 11 who had initially agreed, 3 had since gone quiet, their phones going to voicemail. One woman's social media accounts deleted overnight. Dex had found when he dug into it a direct message Tanner had sent each of them within the past 48 hours, the kind of message that stopped just short of an explicit threat, but landed with the full weight of one anyway, which left 8 confirmed. Not enough. Not yet. The mechanism was becoming clear. Tanner was not just reactive, he was active. He was monitoring, tracking, reaching out to anyone who might speak against him, and applying pressure precisely calibrated to stay just below the legal threshold. He had done this before. He knew how far he could push. He knew which words created fear without creating liability. Reese sat with the numbers, 8 out of 17 with 3 more possibly reachable if they felt safe enough. She needed the ones who had gone silent to change their minds. And for that to happen, she needed to give them something they didn't currently have. She needed to give them each other. On the morning of day 4, she drove Roy to his appointment at the VA clinic. He had tried to cancel it, said he could reschedule, said it wasn't important, and Reese had said simply that they were going. They had gone. She sat in the waiting room and answered emails and watched the door. And when Roy came out 40 minutes later, he was walking slightly better, slightly straighter, like the act of going somewhere and doing something ordinary had reminded his body what ordinary felt like. They were crossing the parking lot toward her truck when she saw the sedan. Dark blue, parked across the lot 2 rows back, engine off, and Tanner behind the wheel, phone up recording. The heat in her chest was instantaneous. It arrived before thought, before decision, like a physical thing with its own velocity. She felt it move through her arms and into her hands, felt it in the way her stride changed, felt her body beginning to angle toward the sedan before her mind had caught up. Then she stopped herself. She stopped herself in the middle of the parking lot with her father 3 feet behind her and the sedan 20 yards ahead and the phone recording and the live counter climbing, and she stood there for 2 full seconds doing the hardest thing she had done in years. She turned back to Roy. Keep walking, she said quietly. Straight to the truck. Reese, straight to the truck, Dad. She walked with him. She kept her back to the sedan. She did not look at the phone. She helped Roy into the passenger seat, closed the door, walked around to the driver's side, and got in. She started the engine. He's still there, Roy said. I know. You should. I know what I should do, Reese said, and I know what he wants me to do. They're not the same thing. She backed out of the space, slowly signaled pulled toward the exit. As they passed the sedan, she glanced over once. Tanner was watching her with an expression she recognized now. Not triumph exactly, but something adjacent to it. The look of a man who had moved his piece on the board and was watching to see what moved next. She kept her face neutral. She looked at the road ahead. She drove her father home. She checked every lock in the house twice before she left. That night, Dex called. He posted the parking lot footage, Dex said. VA clinic. He geotagged it. Reese sat down on the edge of her bed. How many view? It's climbing. He titled it, Gang Leader Stalking Me at the VA. A pause. Reese, he's mobilizing them, his followers. He's been posting your name, cross-linking your chapter's page, calling people to leave reviews, make calls. It's coordinated. And the comments. Dex stopped. Tell me. They're going after your gender. Hard. Calling you aggressive, unstable, saying a woman shouldn't be running a chapter. Saying your father should be ashamed of you. Another pause. It's designed. He's choosing the words that he knows will either make you respond and look emotional or not respond and let it stand. Reese was quiet for a moment. The fan in the corner of her bedroom turned back and forth. The city outside was doing what cities do at night, moving, breathing, indifferent. "What about the anonymous tip?" she said. "The burner." "Well, still working on it. It's clean. Whoever set it up knew what they were doing, but—" Dex hesitated. "There's something else. Tanner's crew. I've been tracking them the last 2 days. 3 guys run his technical side handle editing, sometimes help set up the scenes. One of them is 19, goes by Briggs." Another pause. "He's been quiet on social. Went dark about a week ago. No posts, no check-ins, nothing. But before he went dark, he was the one who actually handled their equipment logistics. He knew their schedule. He knew where they were going to be." Reese let that sit. "You think he sent the tip?" "I think he knew what was going to happen on that pier," Dex said carefully. "And I think someone decided they didn't want it to happen without someone there to stop it. Whether that's guilt or something Tanner did to him or something else entirely, I don't know yet. Find him. Working on it." She ended the call. She sat in the quiet of her bedroom and thought about a 19-year-old who had gone dark on his social media a week before the peer, who had known the schedule, who had maybe sat with the knowledge of what was coming and made a choice in the dark that he didn't know how to make in the open. She thought about her father's voice. That's the part that mattered. She thought about 8 people willing to talk out of 17. She set her alarm. She lay down on top of the covers in her clothes. She closed her eyes and did the thing she had trained herself to do over many years of running, something that required her to be functional under pressure. She slept deliberately, efficiently, as an act of discipline. 3 hours later, the phone buzzed. Not Dex this time. The number was Roy's. She was upright before the second buzz. "Dad?" "I'm fine." His voice was controlled, careful. "I'm fine, but you need to come." She was in the truck in 4 minutes. She was at his house in 11. The front door was open, not forced, not broken, just open the way a door is open when someone has come through it recently. The lock was intact. The frame was undamaged. She went in fast and low, hand at her hip, moving through the front room and into the kitchen before she processed what she was seeing. Roy was on the floor, not injured, not bleeding, sitting with his back against the kitchen cabinet, both hands wrapped around Martha's photograph, knees pulled up slightly, head leaning back against the cabinet door. His eyes were open. He was breathing. The tremor in his hands was visible from across the room. Reese crossed to him and crouched down and put both hands on his arms. "Talk to me." "He was here," Roy said. The words landed in her chest like stones dropped into still water. "He was in the house." She made herself stay still, stay steady, hold the crouching position without pulling back or moving toward the door or doing any of the things her body was insisting on. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Did he touch you?" "No." Roy's jaw moved. He looked down at the photograph in his hands. "I was in the bedroom, heard the front door. Thought it was you. I thought maybe you'd come by. You have the key." Came out into the hallway and he was just— A pause. Standing there, in the middle of the living room, filming. Reese waited. He didn't say much, just looked around the room, walked over to the mantel. Roy stopped. His hands tightened on the photograph. He picked up Martha's picture, the one I keep next to the lamp. He picked it up and looked at it for a long time, and then he put it back down and he smiled at me, and he said— His voice cracked for just a moment, one clean break, and then it steadied again. He said, "Just wanted to see where the biker girl's daddy lives." Reese stood up. She walked to the front door. She looked at the lock. The door had been unlocked. Roy forgot to lock it, sometimes always had. It was something she had been telling him to be more careful about for years, something she had never pushed hard enough on because pushing felt like treating him like someone who needed to be managed. The door had been unlocked, which meant Tanner had not broken in. He had walked in. The name that meant he was past the place where carefully maintained distance was possible, past the place where they maintained the quiet fiction that Reese didn't need protecting and Roy didn't need help. She turned her face slightly away. She did not let him see her eyes. "He'll say the door was unlocked," Roy continued, "that he was concerned about the old man living alone, that he was checking in, playing the good citizen. There's nothing to file, nothing that would stick." A pause. "He's smarter than us, baby girl. He knows every inch of the line and he stays just behind it." Reese turned back. Her face was composed. Her voice was level. "He's not smarter than us," she said. "He's just had more practice going unchallenged." She called Dex from the kitchen while Roy sat in his chair in the living room with the television on and Martha's photograph on the table beside him. "Emergency meeting," she said. "Mac's place, everyone. All chapters." Dex paused. "All chapters. Call Victor Hale in Jacksonville, Orlando, Miami." She looked through the kitchen doorway at her father's silhouette in the chair, the blue television light moving across his face. "Whoever Tanner thinks he's dealing with, let's show him what that actually looks like." She called Mac next, then Stone. Then she stood in Roy's kitchen and sent a text to the chapter group. 7 words emergency. Max. Bring anyone you trust. Then she sat down at the kitchen table across from her father, and they watched television together for 2 hours without talking much. And it was the closest thing to normal that either of them had felt since the pier. And she let herself have those 2 hours before she stood up and kissed the top of his head and told him she'd be back before morning. He caught her wrist as she turned to go. "Don't become what he says you are," Roy said. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at Martha's photograph. "Whatever you're planning tonight, whatever direction this goes." He paused. "Your mother used to say that the way you fight something matters as much as whether you win." Reese looked at his hand on her wrist. She thought about Tanner standing in this room holding this photograph smiling. "I know, Dad," she said. "Do you, wow?" "Yes." She covered his hand with hers for a moment. "I promise." She drove to Mac's house through streets that were mostly empty. At that hour, the city quiet around her, the bay dark and flat to the west. She had been running on 3 hours of sleep, and the focused clarity that comes when everything extraneous has burned away, and only what is essential remains. She was not angry anymore. She had moved through anger and out the other side into something quieter and more durable. She parked outside Mac's garage and sat in the truck for a moment, looking at the light coming through the gap under the door. She could hear voices, more than she expected. She got out. She pushed the door open. The garage was full. Tampa chapter along the back wall. Dex, Mac, Stone, 6 others, all of them standing, all of them watching the door. But they were not alone. Along the left side, a group she didn't immediately recognize, road dust on their jackets. Long haul look to their boots. Jacksonville patches. 3 bikes parked outside she hadn't noticed in the dark. Along the right wall, 2 men from Orlando she knew by sight. And in the back corner, 4 riders from Miami she had met once at a regional meeting 3 years ago, led by a quiet, watchful man named Hendricks, who didn't speak often, but who, when he did, people tended to stop and listen. Standing near the center of the room, his arms folded, was Victor Hale. Victor was 56 years old, gray-bearded, with the stillness of a man who had been through enough that very little surprised him anymore. He had been running the Jacksonville chapter for 11 years. He had known Reese's predecessor and had supported her nomination to lead Tampa with the kind of straightforward confidence that carried no conditions attached. He was the person she would have called. Eventually, Dex had called him first. Victor looked at her as she came in. He didn't make a speech of it. He just nodded once, the nod of someone who has assessed the situation and decided where they stand. "Dex sent word," Victor said. "Said your family was being hunted." "That's accurate," Reese said. Victor looked at her for a moment. "Then it's not just your problem anymore." The room shifted slightly, not dramatically, not with noise or ceremony, just the almost imperceptible change in atmosphere that happens when a decision becomes collective. And then from the far corner of the garage near the workbench where Mac kept his tools, a woman stepped forward. She was in her early 70s, white-haired with a blue sling on her right arm that still had the clinical newness of something recently fitted. Her face was composed in the way of someone who has decided on an action and no longer doubts it. She looked at Reese directly. "My name is Dorothea Wren," she said. "Tanner Voss pushed me down outside a grocery store in Clearwater 6 months ago. I broke my arm on the pavement. He filmed the whole thing and uploaded it, and when I went to the police, they told me it was his word against mine." She paused. "I heard what he's doing to your father. I heard what he did to that veteran at the VA clinic and to the young woman who went into early labor." Another pause. "I'm done being afraid of him." The garage was quiet. Reese looked at Dorothea Wren, at the sling, at the steady eyes, at the absolute absence of hesitation in her posture, and felt something shift in her chest. Not relief exactly, something more structural than relief. The feeling of a foundation that has been cracking suddenly finding new support. From beside Dorothea, a man stepped forward. Late 50s military bearing, still visible in the set of his shoulders even after years of civilian life. Garrett Booth, he said, former Army. Tanner cornered me outside the Tampa VA last year. Spent 20 minutes not letting me leave, asking about my service, my injuries, my nightmares. I had a panic attack on camera. He called the video Broken Vet Loses It. It has 400,000 views. His jaw was set. I'm done too. Then a younger woman, early 30s, who had been standing near the back, Lorraine Sutter. He blocked the entrance to my pharmacy when I was 8 months pregnant. Made jokes about the baby's father, about my weight, about whether I could afford what I was buying. I was in early labor 6 hours later from the stress. She looked at Reese. My daughter is 7 months old now. She's healthy, but I kept thinking about the next woman he would do that to, the next one who wouldn't be as lucky. One by one they stepped forward. Not all 17-3 had not come. 2 had sent word they supported, but couldn't be present. 1 was still unreachable. But 11 of them were in this garage, standing in the same light, saying their names and their stories without flinching. Reese listened to every word. When the room went quiet, Victor Hale spoke. We've been playing defense, he said, letting him set the terms. That ends tonight. He looked at Reese. You've been building a case. You've got evidence. You've got witnesses. What you need now is an audience, the right audience, at the right moment, in the right place. Reese had already been thinking about it. Had been thinking about it since the moment she walked out of the police station and watched Tanner's second video load on her phone. She had been turning the shape of it over in her mind for days, fitting pieces together, looking for the approach that would not give him what he wanted, that would not give him footage of her losing control or the chapter using force, or any of the 100 things he was clearly prepared to use against her. There was only one move that Tanner couldn't counter with the tools he had. A press conference, she said, Tampa City Hall steps, every media outlet in Florida, every platform he uses. We go live the same time he goes live. We put the victims in front of cameras. We show the unedited footage. We build the full picture in public in real time where he can't edit it afterward. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Dex said, he'll be there. He'll show up and try to make it about him. I know, Reese said. I'm counting on it. Victor looked at her steadily. You understand what you're inviting. I understand that he thinks he controls the narrative because he's always been the only one with a camera, Reese said. Tomorrow, everyone has a camera, and this time we're all telling the same story. Victor nodded slowly. Then he turned to the room. We've got work to do. What happened in the next 3 hours was not dramatic. It was the unglamorous machinery of preparation. Phones, laptops, calls to legal contacts, calls to advocacy organizations, calls to local journalists who covered crime and social media and community issues. Mac coordinated logistics. Stone handled security planning. Dex worked the press list with the methodical focus of someone who had done event coordination in a previous life and still carried the instincts for it. Victor handled calls to chapter leadership in 3 cities. Reese handled everything else. At one point, near 2 in the morning, Dorothea Wren appeared at her elbow with a cup of coffee warm, which was notable given the circumstances. Thank you, Reese said. Dorothea looked at her for a moment. How long has it been since you slept? Long enough. Your father, Dorothea said. He's all right. Reese looked across the garage to where the planning was happening at the maps and contact lists spread across the workbench, at the 11 people who had been hurt by Tanner Voss and were now refusing to stay hurt in silence. He will be, she said. Dorothea nodded. She didn't offer comfort or reassurance. She just stood there for a moment drinking her own coffee, and the solidarity of it was more useful than anything she could have said. Toward 3 in the morning, Dex found her near the back wall. Briggs, he said quietly. Reese looked at him. I found him. Dex's voice was low, careful. He's been staying with a friend across town. He's the one who sent the tip. He's had footage of Tanner's internal crew operations for 6 months, recordings, text threads, the back end of how the whole operation gets set up. Dex paused. Tanner's been blackmailing him, kept him in the crew by threatening to expose something personal. Briggs has been waiting for a moment where speaking up wouldn't just get him buried. Reese processed that. Does he know about tomorrow? He does now. She was quiet for a moment. Can he be there? He's already said yes. She looked at the ceiling of the garage, the bare bulb, the faint cobwebs in the rafters. A 19-year-old who had watched what he was part of and tried in the only way available to him at the time to stop it without exposing himself to consequences he couldn't survive alone. Who had sent a message to a burner phone and hoped it would reach the right person in time. It had. Make sure he's safe, Reese said. And make sure Detective Calloway knows he's going to be there. Dex nodded. He started to move away, then stopped. Reese, she looked at him. He's going to see it coming, Dex said. Tanner, he's going to know something's happening tomorrow. He'll prepare. I know. And he's going to show up anyway. I know that too, Reese said. That's the thing about men who've never been stopped. They always think they're the smartest person in the room right up until the moment they find out they're not. She drove back to Roy's house before dawn and let herself in with her key and checked every room quietly without waking him. She stood in the living room for a moment in the dark, looking at the mantel at the place where Martha's photograph usually sat. Roy had moved it to the bedroom, keeping it closer. She went to the kitchen and made coffee and sat at the table where she had sat with him that first afternoon in the half-dark with the curtains drawn, and she let herself think about everything that was going to happen in a few hours. Tomorrow, Tanner Voss would stand at the edge of Tampa City Hall and watch 11 people take away every tool he had used to protect himself. He would watch his own voice, his own words, his own footage, destroy the narrative he had spent a week constructing. He would discover that the arithmetic of vulnerability that he had relied on for 3 years, that isolated people don't fight back, that victims stay silent, that the system would rather look away than intervene, had stopped being true. It had stopped being true the moment he chose the wrong man on a pier on a Tuesday morning. The wrong man whose daughter happened to know exactly what community looked like when it decided to show up. The sun came up over the rooftops. The coffee was warm. In the next room, Roy was sleeping. Reese sat at the kitchen table and waited for the day to begin. The steps of Tampa City Hall faced south, which meant that at 2 in the afternoon, the sun came straight down on them. Without mercy, the kind of Florida light that made everything look overexposed, too bright, the shadows too sharp. By 1:30, the media had already claimed their positions: 4 local news crews, 2 radio journalists with handheld recorders, 3 independent reporters who covered social media and digital culture, and a photographer from the Tampa Bay Times who had been doing this long enough to know where to stand before anything happened. Reese arrived at 1:45 with Dex and Mac flanking her and the rest of the Tampa chapter spread across the base of the steps in a loose, deliberate formation that communicated presence without aggression. Victor Hale and 4 Jacksonville riders were already there, positioned to the left. Hendricks from Miami stood near the podium that Mac had arranged, a simple wooden stand, a microphone, nothing elaborate, nothing that looked like a performance. The 11 were there. Dorothea Wren arrived first, arm in the blue sling, wearing a pale gray blouse that made her look exactly like what she was, a 71-year-old woman who had been hurt and had decided carefully and deliberately that the world was going to know about it. Garrett Booth came next, dressed in a collared shirt, his posture carrying that military straightness that never entirely leaves a person. Lorraine Sutter arrived with a friend for support, her hands not entirely steady, but her chin up. The others came in 1s and 2s. Each of them had been hurt. Each of them had stayed silent because silence had seemed like the only available option. Each of them was here now because someone had finally made it possible to be somewhere else. Reese greeted each one personally. She did not make speeches. She shook hands. She held eye contact. She said, "Thank you for being here," and meant it in the specific way that means, "I understand what this cost you, and I will not waste it." At 1:53, Tanner Voss arrived. He came from the parking structure across the street, walking fast, his crew of 2 behind him. The third she knew would not be coming. He had his phone up before he cleared the corner, the live stream already running and the red dot already blinking. He planted himself at the far edge of the plaza, maybe 40 feet from the steps, and he smiled into the camera with the confidence of a man who believes he is about to win. "They're here," he said to his audience, his voice carrying that studied casual energy he had perfected over 3 years and 12 videos and 17 people whose pain he had turned into content. 30,000 of you watching right now. They called this whole thing to come after me, to try to silence me, but I'm not going anywhere. I'm right here. Truth always wins, right? He panned the camera slowly across the scene, the media, the riders, the people on the steps. He let the camera settle on Reese for a moment and grinned. Let's see what she's got. Reese did not look at him. She stepped to the microphone. She let the crowd settle. She looked out at the reporters, at the cameras, at the people who had gathered along the edge of the plaza, curious passers-by, a few dozen onlookers who had seen something on their phones and come to watch in person. She spoke without notes. My name is Reese Callahan. I am the president of the Tampa chapter. She paused just briefly. 6 days ago, I watched a man assault my father on this city's pier. My father is a 73-year-old veteran. He was alone. He was attacked in broad daylight in front of a crowd of people, and no one moved. Another pause. The man who did it was Tanner Voss. He filmed it. He posted it. He made money from it. And when I stopped him, he told the world I was the criminal. She looked out at the crowd steadily. Today, you are going to hear from the people he has been hurting for 3 years. Not my version. Theirs. She stepped back from the microphone. Dorothea Wren took her place. She moved slowly, deliberately, with the careful economy of movement of someone whose body had been reminded recently of its own fragility. She adjusted the microphone slightly and looked out at the cameras and at Tanner 40 feet away, phone still up, still streaming. My name is Dorothea Wren, she said. I am 71 years old. I live in Clearwater, Florida. I have lived in Clearwater for 34 years. She paused. 6 months ago on a Wednesday afternoon, I went to the grocery store on my street, the one I have been going to for 20 years. Tanner Voss followed me through the store. He mocked my age, my appearance, the way I moved. When I asked him to stop and leave me alone, he pushed me. She said the 2 words cleanly without dramatizing them. I fell on the linoleum floor in the cereal aisle and I broke my arm, and I lay there while he laughed and his camera kept rolling. The plaza was very quiet. He uploaded the video that same evening, Dorothea continued. He titled it, Cranky Old Woman Gets What She Deserves. It has 180,000 views. I am one of those views because I watched it because I needed to see what had happened to me through his eyes. A pause. When I went to the police, I was told it was his word against mine. I had no footage. I had a broken arm and a police report that went nowhere. She looked at the screen that Dex had set up to the left of the podium. But the store had security cameras. Dex pressed play. The footage was clear. Timestamp in the corner. No cuts, no edits. Just the wide-angle view of a grocery store aisle, the quality slightly soft, the way security footage always is, but clear enough. Dorothea in her coat moving toward the cereal. Tanner behind her phone up. The way he matched her pace when she tried to move past him. The moment she turned and said something to him, her face visibly distressed. And then his hand moving out, connecting with her shoulder, and then Dorothea going down and Tanner stepping back, and the sound of laughter that was audible even through the security system's cheap microphone. The crowd murmured. The reporters wrote. One of the television cameras swung from the screen to Tanner 40 feet away, and he took half a step back without seeming to realize he had done it. Garrett Booth came next. He stood at the microphone the way he stood everywhere, straight, economical, no wasted movement. He had the kind of face that had done a great deal of living and stopped being surprised by most of it. My name is Garrett Booth, he said. I served 12 years in the United States Army. I have been a resident of Tampa for 9 years. He looked at the cameras without blinking. 14 months ago, Tanner Voss found me in the parking lot of the Tampa 5A clinic. I had just come from an appointment. He approached me with his phone and began asking about my service, my injuries, my post-traumatic stress disorder. A pause. I asked him to stop. He did not stop. I asked him to move so I could reach my vehicle. He blocked my path. This went on for 20 minutes. He stopped, and for a moment the effort of what he was doing showed in the set of his jaw, the slight tightening around his eyes, and then it released. I had a panic attack in that parking lot, on camera, in front of however many people were watching his stream that day. He looked down at the podium for just a moment. He titled the video, Broken Vet Loses It, Garrett said. It has 400,000 views. In the comments, people call me weak. People call me dangerous. People say I should have my benefits taken away. People say men like me shouldn't be allowed in public. He looked up. I have not gone back to the VA clinic since that day. I have rescheduled my appointments 3 times. The man who filmed me has never thought about me again, and I have thought about that parking lot every single day. He stepped back from the microphone. The crowd was not murmuring anymore. The crowd was still. Lorraine Sutter came forward. Her friend stood just behind her, close enough to be present, far enough back to let Lorraine have the space. She had the deliberate composure of someone who had rehearsed this and knew the rehearsal might not hold, but was going to try anyway. "My name is Lorraine Sutter," she said. "When Tanner Voss targeted me, I was 8 months pregnant." She let that land. "He blocked the entrance to my pharmacy. He made jokes about my body, about the baby's father, about whether I could afford my prescription. I begged him to move. He didn't move until I was crying." A pause. "I went into early labor that night. My daughter was born 6 weeks early. She spent 11 days in the neonatal unit." Her voice held just barely. "She is 7 months old now. She is healthy and she is beautiful, and she is the reason I am standing here today, because I kept thinking, what if the next woman he does this to isn't as lucky as I was?" One by one, the others came forward. Each story was different in its details and identical in its structure. A person alone, a predator with a camera, a public space that offered no protection. A man who had been stopped in a plaza and interrogated about his mental health history until he broke down. A woman who had been followed from a bus stop and filmed sobbing after Tanner made a phone call to someone she knew and told them false things while she listened. An elderly couple who had been separated in a park and each told the other had been hurt just to film their panic. Each story arrived in the plaza like something physical, something with weight, and the weight accumulated. Tanner's live stream viewership, which had peaked at 34,000 when the press conference began, had dropped to 22,000 by the time the fourth victim spoke. The drop was not because people had stopped watching. It was because the people watching were no longer the audience he had built. New people were coming in, people who had been sent the link by someone who said, "You need to see this," people following. Breaking news tags. People who had followed Tanner for years and were experiencing in real time the particular vertigo of discovering that the person you have been cheering for is not who you thought they were. His chat had changed. For 6 days, it had been a river of support. "You've got this. She's the criminal press charges. We've got your back." Now the current was shifting. Isolated voices, first asking questions, then more. Then a tone that was unmistakable once you had heard it before the sound of an audience turning. Tanner kept the phone up. His expression had not changed, still the studied casualness, still the slight smile. But Reese, watching him from the side of the steps, could see the small adjustments happening in real time. The way his weight had shifted, the way his free hand had moved to his jacket pocket and back out again. The calculations of a man who is used to controlling every variable, discovering that there are variables he did not account for. She let him watch. She waited until the last of the 11 had spoken. Then Dex connected his laptop to the screen. "What you've heard today," Reese said, returning to the microphone, "is what Tanner Voss does when his camera is pointed at other people. Now you're going to hear what he says when he thinks the camera is only pointed at him." Dex pressed play. The footage was interior. The backseat of a car, cramped and slightly dark, shot on someone's phone at close range. Tanner and 2 of his crew reviewing footage on a laptop. Tanner's face was relaxed in the way it was never relaxed on camera. The performance dropped entirely, the careful emotional calibration gone, leaving something underneath that was harder and entirely honest. "This one's good," Tanner said on the screen, pointing at something on the laptop. "But we need more. The crying starts too late. Audience drops off at the 2-minute mark if there's no reaction by then." One of his crew said something inaudible. No, Tanner said. "You don't tell them what's going to happen. You let them think it's normal, and then you take it away. That's the structure. That's what gets the watch time." He scrolled. "See, this part here, this is where she starts to understand that I'm not leaving. That's the content. Get me to that faster next time." He leaned back. "Get me crying. Get me breaking down. That's the good stuff. That's what they actually want." The footage continued for another 40 seconds, Tanner discussing with complete technical detachment how to more efficiently extract emotional distress from people who did not know they were being used. His own voice, his own face, his own words. The plaza was silent in a way that had nothing to do with quiet and everything to do with weight. Reese looked at Tanner across the 40 feet of open space. He was still holding his phone up. His live viewer count was at 11,000 and still dropping. His chat was moving too fast to read, but the tone of it was unmistakable, even at a distance. He opened his mouth. His voice came out slightly off the register of the confident performance, and he heard it himself and stopped. He started again. This is a setup. That footage is Mr. Voss. The voice came from the edge of the crowd clear, and carrying neither loud nor soft, the kind of voice that arrives at exactly the register needed to be heard without effort. Detective Renee Calloway had been standing near the back of the press gathering since 1:58. She had watched the footage. She had listened to the victims. She had the folder that Reese had given her 6 days ago, and she had spent those 6 days building what the folder had started. She walked now from the edge of the crowd toward Tanner with the unhurried movement of someone who has already done the work and is now simply completing it. Behind her and to the left stood a young man, 19 years old, in a gray jacket, standing very still with the look of someone who has made an irreversible decision and is living in the first moments after it. Briggs. He had positioned himself where Tanner would see him clearly. He had waited for this moment specifically, not for drama, not for effect, but because he had spent 6 months carrying footage and evidence and the knowledge of what he had been part of, and he needed Tanner to understand in the moment when it mattered exactly how the information had traveled. Tanner's eyes found him. Something happened in Tanner's face that was different from everything that had come before, not the practiced fear of the hospital video, not the calculated confidence of the parking lot, not the performance that had gotten him this far. Something real. The specific expression of a man who realizes that the person he thought he owned has been free for longer than he knew. "You," Tanner started. Briggs looked at him steadily and said nothing. Calloway reached Tanner. She stopped 2 feet from him and said what she said at her usual volume, which meant the reporters and the cameras and the crowd between them and the microphone all heard it clearly. "Tanner Voss, I need you to come with me. We have 17 complaints and enough documentation to begin formal proceedings on multiple charges." She paused. "You can come voluntarily, or we can do this the other way." The chat was a wall of text moving too fast to read. The cameras were on him. All of them, the news crews, the independent reporters, his own crew's cameras, and his own phone still in his hand, still recording. He looked at the phone. He looked at Calloway. He looked at Briggs. He looked at the steps, at the 11 people standing there at Reese at the edge of the podium, watching him with an expression that carried no satisfaction and no triumph. Just the steady, clear regard of someone who has done what needed to be done. He ran, not a considered decision, a body-level response, the kind that bypasses thought entirely, one moment standing, next moment, moving feet on the pavement, cutting left toward the parking structure. He made it 10 steps. The 2 officers in plain clothes who had been standing on the south side of the plaza since 1:30, positioned there by Calloway before the press conference began, because Calloway had been doing this long enough to know what a cornered person does, moved to intercept him with the efficient economy of people who do not need to hurry because they have already done the preparation that makes hurrying unnecessary. He went down on the sidewalk, not hard, not violently, just stopped. His phone hit the pavement and skidded 2 feet and came to rest face up, the camera pointing at the sky, the live stream still running, 8,000 people watching a square of blue Florida sky and the edge of a concrete curb, and hearing from just off camera the sound of handcuffs. The plaza erupted. Not with violence, not with chaos, with noise. The noise of several hundred people processing something simultaneously, the murmur building and then breaking into voices. The cameras all moving at once, the reporters already on their phones, the social media feeds already accelerating outward. Reese did not cheer. She watched Tanner led back across the plaza toward the waiting car, watched him try once more to find the camera, to find the angle, to find the frame that would let him construct one more version of this moment that worked in his favor, and watched him fail to find it, because for once, the cameras were not instruments he controlled, but witnesses he could not manage. She watched until the car door closed. Then she turned to the steps. Roy was sitting in the chair that Mac had placed there 2 hours earlier, just to the right of the podium, slightly back from the main action, but with a clear line of sight to everything. He had insisted on being here forwards. Reese had insisted on the chair. They had reached that compromise the way they reached most things, without either of them entirely getting what they wanted and both of them understanding why. He was sitting very straight. His hands were on his knees. His cane was leaning against the chair beside him. His eyes were wet. She walked to him and crouched down to his level the way she had in the kitchen 4 days ago, and she looked at her father's face in the full Florida afternoon light, the lines of it, the history in it, the expression of a man who has been carrying something for days and has just set it down. "It's done," she said. Roy reached out and put his hand on her face for a moment, a gesture she had not felt since she was a small child, since the days before she had grown into someone who did not need that kind of tending. His palm was rough and warm and entirely certain. "Thank you," he said. His voice was steady. She put her hand over his, held it there for a moment, and then stood up. Dorothea Wren appeared at her elbow. "The reporters want statements." "Give them 5 minutes," Reese said. "Let the moment breathe." Victor Hale came down from the steps and stood beside her, looking at the plaza as it slowly reorganized itself into something post-event. "How are you, Pam? Ask me tomorrow." He made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Fair enough." He looked at Roy in the chair and something shifted in his expression, the professional assessment giving way briefly to something more human. "He did good today, being here." "He's always done good," Reese said. "He just needed the world to stop making it so hard." The next hours moved in the uneven rhythm of aftermath, fast in some places, and strangely slow in others, full of the mechanical requirements of follow-through that come after the decisive moment. Reese gave a statement to Detective Calloway. She coordinated with the legal team that had come on pro bono. She spoke briefly to 3 reporters, saying less than they wanted and exactly what was necessary. She made sure each of the 11 had someone with them, had a way home, had a number to call if anything happened in the days ahead. Briggs sat on the steps alone for a while, looking at the pavement until Reese walked over and sat down next to him. He looked up. He was younger than she had expected, even knowing he was 19. There was something in his face that came from having been in a situation that required an older kind of thinking than he was ready for. "You sent the tip," she said. It wasn't a question. "I didn't know what else to do," Briggs said. "I'd been trying to figure out how to get out for months. There was something he was holding over me, and every time I thought about going to the police, I thought about him using it, and He stopped. "I knew what he was going to do at the pier. I saw the scouting footage. I couldn't just let it happen." "But you could have called the police directly," Reese said. "Not accusatory, just accurate." "I was scared," Briggs said. "I knew if it was just me, he'd bury me. He's done it before." He looked at her. "But if someone with more," he gestured vaguely at the plaza at the aftermath of everything, "someone with more standing, someone he couldn't just erase with the video." Reese was quiet for a moment. "You took a risk," she said. "Sending that tip blind. You didn't know if I'd show up in time. You didn't know if I'd handle it the right way or the wrong way." "No," Briggs said, "but I knew what he'd picked, and I figured—" He paused. "I figured if he'd made that big a mistake about who to target, and maybe he'd made other mistakes too." He looked at his hands. "I'm sorry it took me so long to do something." Reese looked at him for a moment. He was 19 years old and had been trapped in something by someone who knew exactly how to use fear as a leash. And he had found the one action available to him, and he had taken it. "You did enough," she said. "You did it at the right time." She left him there and went back to her father. The news cycle moved the way Reese had known it would, fast, accelerating, self-amplifying. By 6 in the evening, the press conference footage was on every major Florida outlet. By 8, it had been picked up nationally. By midnight, Tanner Voss's channel had been demonetized by the platform the decision announced in a brief statement citing violations of community guidelines regarding content that targeted and exploited vulnerable individuals. His sponsors moved faster than the platform. The gaming app pulled its contract within 4 hours of the press conference footage going wide, releasing a statement that used the word values 4 times in 2 paragraphs. 2 other brand partnerships quietly ended without statements at all. His crew had already retained separate legal counsel and were cooperating with the prosecution in exchange for reduced charges. Tanner's attorney issued a statement that used the words context and mischaracterization and out of the full picture, which was the kind of statement that sounds like something and means nothing. The formal charges came the following morning: assault, criminal stalking, harassment, breaking and entering, fraud, and 7 counts of evidence tampering relating to the edited footage he had posted. 17 complainants total. The trial was set for the following spring. None of that was the thing that mattered most to Reese. The thing that mattered most happened 3 days after the press conference, when her phone rang at 8:30 in the morning, and the voice on the other end was her father's, and he said without preamble, "I went to the pier this morning." She stopped moving. "You did?" "Took my coffee." A pause. "Watched the pelicans for a while." The same father was there with his little girl trying to teach her to fish. "She still can't cast to save her life." Another pause, and she could hear in it the warmth that Roy carried for small children, for families, for the ordinary evidence of the world continuing. It was a good morning. Reese sat down at her kitchen table. She pressed her free hand flat against the wood and felt the solidness of it. "I'm glad," she said. "I thought you'd want to know." "I did." A pause. "You should come by for dinner sometime this week. I'm going to make the chili." "Dad, last time you made the chili, it was fine." "It was not fine." "It was fine," Roy said with the firmness of a man who has decided to stop arguing a point on the grounds that he has already won it, "and you're coming on Thursday." She was smiling when she ended the call, and she sat with that for a moment before getting up. 3 weeks after the press conference, Dorothea Wren started a weekly meeting for people who had been targeted by online harassment. She held it in the community room of her church on Tuesday evenings. By the fourth week, there were 14 people attending. She called Roy every Tuesday before the meeting, and Roy called her every Tuesday after, and between them, they had built something that neither of them could have named precisely, but that both of them understood as necessary. Garrett Booth went back to the VA clinic. He made his rescheduled appointment and then kept the next one and the one after that. He had started cautiously attending a group for veterans dealing with PTSD, and he had mentioned Roy's name to the group coordinator as someone who might be willing to come talk to them about resilience. And Roy had said yes before Reese had even finished relaying the invitation. Lorraine Sutter had sent a photograph of her daughter, 7 months old, round-cheeked, mid-laugh, entirely unaware of everything that had preceded her presence in the world. Roy kept the photograph in his wallet next to Martha's. On a Saturday morning, 6 weeks after the press conference, Reese rode out to the pier alone. She went early before the families arrived, before the fishing crowd set up, when the boards were still mostly empty and the light was coming in low and gold off the water, and the pelicans were doing their slow, deliberate work above the surface. She stood at the railing at the far end, the spot where Roy had been sitting, the spot where everything had started, and she looked out at Tampa Bay. She thought about the anonymous tip in the burner phone and a 19-year-old who had done the one small thing available to him in the dark and hoped it would be enough. She thought about 17 people, most of whom had stayed silent until they had each other. She thought about her father's voice saying that's the part that mattered, and about Martha's photograph, and about what it meant to live alone in a house for 8 years because you didn't want to be a burden to the people who loved you. She thought about Roy at the pier that morning with his coffee, watching the little girl who still couldn't cast. Her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. A message from her father, which was unusual. Roy generally preferred phone calls, considered texting a medium designed for people who had something to hide. It said, "Come to the pier when you get a chance. Something I want to show you." She looked up from the phone. She looked to the left down the length of the pier. Roy was 50 yards away, standing at the railing with his coffee and his cane, watching her. He raised one hand, not a wave, just an acknowledgement, the understated gesture of a man who did not need to perform his feelings to have them. She walked toward him. When she reached him, he was looking out at the water. She came to stand beside him and leaned her arms on the railing and looked out at the same water the same morning, the same wide and patient bay that had been here before any of this and would be here long after. "You came early," she said. "Couldn't sleep past 6. Never could." He drank his coffee. "Always been a morning person. Your mother thought it was a personal failing." She wasn't wrong. He made the sound he made when he was not going to admit she was right, but was not going to argue either. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Roy reached into his jacket pocket and handed her his phone. On the screen was a text message from a number he had saved under the name Sarah Tampa. "My name is Sarah. I wanted to say thank you. I saw what happened. I saw everything. I've been dealing with something similar for 3 months. Someone following me, filming me, making me afraid to leave my house. Watching you stand up made me think maybe I don't have to just wait for it to stop. I don't really know who to call. I was wondering if you might." Roy looked at her. "Told her I'd ask you." Reese read the message twice. She thought about Dorothea Wren's Tuesday meetings and Garrett Booth's VA appointments and the photograph of Lorraine's daughter in Roy's wallet. She thought about what her father had said the night of the press conference. Sitting in the kitchen with Martha's photograph on the table, I thought I was alone. I was wrong. She handed the phone back. "Tell her yes," Reese said. "Tell her we'll call her today." Roy nodded. He started typing with the careful two-finger approach of a man who had made peace with the technology without ever fully trusting it. He typed it for a moment and then stopped. "Reese." "Yeah." He didn't look up from the phone. "I know I said I didn't want to be a burden. After your mother, all those years." A pause. "I think I had it wrong. I thought asking for help was the same as taking something. I didn't understand it was—" He stopped, started again. "I didn't understand it went the other way, too." She looked at the side of his face, the morning light on it. 8 years of solitude had settled into the lines around his eyes, the way weather settles into wood quietly permanently until you couldn't separate the marks from the grain. But he was here. He was on the pier. He was holding his coffee and watching the water, and the lines around his eyes this morning had some ease in them that hadn't been there a week ago. "It does," she said. He nodded once. He finished typing. He put the phone back in his pocket. They stood at the railing together while the morning opened up around them, the light changing the water, moving the city beginning to make its daily noise behind them. Families arriving on the pier, the fishing crowd setting up. The little girl from before, back with her father and her sideways cast laughing when the line went wide. Reese watched the water. Tanner Voss would fight the charges. He would spend the months before the trial attempting to rebuild what had been dismantled, looking for new angles, new audiences, new narratives. He would find that the thing he had relied on, the willingness of the world to look away, had been altered in some small but durable way by what had happened at Tampa City Hall. Not fixed, not solved, altered, made slightly less hospitable to what he did and how he did it. That was not everything, but it was not nothing. What Reese had learned in the 6 days between the pier and the press conference was not something she could have named cleanly before any of it happened. It was something about the weight of isolation, how it was manufactured, how it was maintained by the accumulated small decisions of people who looked away rather than toward, and about how that weight could be lifted not by any single act of heroism, but by the accumulation of opposite decisions, by Dorothea Wren standing up, by Garrett Booth going back to the VA, by Briggs sending a text in the dark and hoping it reached the right person, by Roy Callahan going back to the pier on a Tuesday morning and watching the pelicans and deciding that the space he occupied in the world was still his. The sun was fully up now. The pier was filling. Someone's dog was trying to get into the bait shop and making an event of it, and the owner was making an equally enthusiastic event of preventing it, and several children had stopped to watch, with the complete investment that children bring to other people's minor dramas. Roy watched the dog situation with quiet approval. "Thursday," he said. "Chili." "Thursday," Reese said. "And I'm bringing cornbread this time, so there's something edible on the table." Roy looked at her. "There is nothing wrong with my chili." "Dad, there is nothing wrong with it." She looked back at the water. She let him have the last word, which she did rarely enough that it was a gift when she did it, and he knew it, and neither of them said anything about that either. Somewhere across the bay, a freighter was moving slowly toward the port low in the water, with whatever it was carrying, the morning light catching the metal of it and turning it briefly gold before it passed into the shadow of the bridge. Roy reached over and put his hand on her arm once. Brief, firm, the same gesture as the kitchen floor 6 days ago, but different in meaning now, not the grip of a man holding on, but the steady pressure of one who has found his footing again and intends to keep it. She covered his hand with hers. They stayed at the railing while the morning continued around them. The pier filling up the city, moving the bay, doing what it had always done and would keep doing, wide and silver and patient, holding the light and giving it back again, the way water does, the way time does, the way the people who love each other do when they finally stop pretending they can do it alone.